In the golden halls of Eldrath, music was more than art, it was the kingdom's soul. The realm had suffered long years of war with neighboring Dravendor, and when peace finally came, the people looked for someone to remind them what beauty felt like. They found her. Ariel Wynn was not born of noble blood. She was the daughter of a healer and a blacksmith in the town of Greystone. But when she first touched a harp at the age of 7, it was as if the gods themselves leaned closer to listen. Her music was more than notes and rhythm. It was raw emotion spun in silver threads that lifted even the weariest heart. By the time she was 17, she had been summoned to the royal court of Eldrath. There she played for kings and queens, lords and scholars. The capital adored her. Nobles wrote sonnets in her name. The poor snuck outside the palace walls at night just to hear the echo of her harp dancing on the wind. Among those captivated was Prince Corwin, the king's only son. A gentle soul with little interest in politics or war, Corwin found peace in Ariel's music and slowly in her presence. Whispers grew, of course, about how often the prince visited her chambers, how the two would talk long after her performances ended. That was when the envy began. Countess Mareva of House Velthorn had long desired Prince Corwin for her own ambitions. She was sharp-tongued, stunning, and influential, but she lacked what Ariel possessed: warmth, sincerity, and something Mareva could never control. "She's bewitching the court," Mareva told the king one evening, her voice sweet with concern. "Your Majesty, I have reason to believe Ariel's talents are not natural." The king frowned. "She plays well, yes. But magic." The servants talk. "They say animals follow her through the gardens, that her harp sings even when untouched. I've heard it myself." She leaned closer. "What if she is weaving spells with every note? What if she has ensnared your son?" The king was old, weary, and frightened by rumors of sorcery, especially after a war in which magic had played such a terrible part. In a single night he ordered an inquisition. Ariel was dragged from her quarters before dawn. Her harp was smashed before her eyes, its splinters scattered across the marble. She begged for mercy, but her words were twisted by fear. Nobles who had praised her yesterday now looked away in silence. Prince Corwin was kept under guard, unable to speak in her defense. She was accused of sorcery. There was no trial. To avoid the scandal of public execution, the king chose a quieter punishment. Ariel's hands were to be broken so she could never play again, and her tongue removed to silence her song forever. They carried out the sentence in the royal gardens beneath the statue of the first king of Eldrath. The place where she had once played moonlit lullabies now bore witness to her screams. When it was done, she was wrapped in a plain shroud and cast beyond the walls of the city. The king forbade any from speaking her name again. To the world, Ariel Wynn vanished. But she did not die. They left her near the old road to Greystone, a body more broken than living, wrapped in a blood-stained shroud. The guards who threw her from the cart did not check to see if she breathed. They simply turned back toward the capital content that the sentence had been fulfilled. But Ariel lived. Pain kept her awake, pain that clung to her every breath. Her tongue was gone, her mouth dry with blood. Her fingers, once nimble dancers across harp strings, were swollen, twisted, and blackening. She couldn't cry. She couldn't scream. All she could do was crawl. She dragged herself to the edge of the forest where the trees began to thicken and the wind whispered through branches like a forgotten song. It was there beneath a hollow elm that a pair of strangers found her. They were wanderers, outcasts, and healers banished from Eldrath long ago for their faith in the old ways. They did not speak when they lifted her. They did not ask questions. They brought her to the ruins of a long-abandoned chapel nestled deep in the forest, a place where time seemed to bend and memories refused to die. It took many weeks before Ariel could sit upright. Her hands would never be what they once were. Her mouth would never shape words again. But her eyes still burned with a quiet fire. The wanderers left her a place to sleep, food to eat, and space to breathe. Then they left her alone as if they knew she needed silence more than company. The nights were long. Ariel would sit beside the chapel's cracked altar, staring at the sky through holes in the roof. When the wind howled through the rafters, it sounded like the cry of her harp mourning its own destruction. Grief, she learned, had a rhythm. So did rage. One evening, a stranger came to the ruins, an old man, face hidden by a deep cowl, eyes like chipped ice. He did not introduce himself. He simply sat across from her and placed a dagger on the altar. "You were once a musician," he said. "Now you must learn a different instrument." She stared at him. "You think you were the only one the court betrayed?" he asked softly. "The only one," the king silenced. He removed his cowl, revealing the once familiar face of Sir Randall Keir, former commander of the Royal Guard thought long dead after he vanished during the final battle with Dravendor. They exiled me for warning him, for saying peace should be built with truth, not gold. They called me a traitor and left me to die. He leaned forward. But I survived, and I can teach you how to make silence into a weapon. Ariel hesitated, then reached for the dagger. Thus began her second life. Each morning, Randall taught her to move without sound, to hide in plain sight. She learned poisons that killed with a single drop, pressure points that paralyzed limbs, and traps that whispered death before striking. Her broken fingers were slow but steady. Her legs, weak from disuse, gained strength as she practiced on uneven forest ground. She could not speak, but she could still listen, and she listened carefully. In the evenings when the shadows grew long, she practiced with a small wooden harp Randall had carved for her, one with only 3 strings. Her fingers trembled with pain, but she forced them to obey. Each pluck was agony, and each note a promise. The forest became her sanctuary. The silence became her language. 3 years passed. Ariel no longer wept at night. She no longer dreamed of the court of golden halls and whispered applause. Instead, she dreamed of Countess Mareva's smile, that smug, hollow smile, and the king's cold eyes as he gave the order. She had no voice left to curse them, but that did not matter. Revenge, she learned, did not require a voice, only patience and precision. When the people of Eldrath first heard of Lady Nyra, they spoke her name in curious tones. She had arrived during the festival of spring, carried by a midnight-colored carriage drawn by 2 silver-maned horses. Her servants were quiet, foreign, and loyal. Her documents spoke of noble blood from the distant province of Erenthia, a place few had ever visited, but all vaguely respected. She entered the court veiled in gossamer silks, her face hidden beneath a lace half-mask. Her silence was interpreted as mystery. Her graceful gestures and cool nods were seen as elegance. In a court hungry for novelty, Lady Nyra was a banquet. No one recognized the girl they had once mutilated and discarded. Ariel, now Lady Nyra, moved through the palace with practiced ease. She had studied the floor plans, memorized the servants' schedules, even paid coin to a few forgotten guards to gain access to the hidden passages. But her greatest weapon was time. Time had changed her face, sculpted it leaner, more severe. Her eyes were no longer wide with innocence, but sharpened by intent. Her hair, once golden like honey, now hung in rich black coils, dyed with walnut ink and charcoal oil. Her voice, of course, was gone, but she had learned to let others fill the silence. The nobles speculated endlessly. She must be a widow of some Erenthian lord. No, she's a priestess of the old gods. Did you see her pendant? I hear she cannot speak because she witnessed something too terrible to name. Countess Mareva, now risen in rank and wealth, took notice quickly. Mareva had aged with remarkable skill, her beauty undimmed, her influence unchecked. She ruled the inner court like a chessboard, moving people with smiles and threats. But even she was drawn to Lady Nyra. At their first meeting, she reached for Ariel's hand and gave a calculating smile. "I've always admired silence," she said. "It makes the world listen closer." Ariel simply bowed her eyes, holding Mareva's a moment longer than etiquette allowed. From that day, they became fixtures in each other's presence. At balls, they danced near the same circles. At dinners, they shared wine. Mareva grew fond of her quiet companion, not knowing she was feeding a ghost. Ariel listened more than she spoke by necessity. Yes, but also by strategy. She watched the way Mareva flinched when certain names were mentioned. She noted the way servants moved quickly around her, always slightly afraid. Whispers began to reach Ariel's ears of secret dealings, buried scandals, and bribes hidden in locked drawers. She paid well for information, and she remembered every name. To the outside world, Lady Nyra became a favorite. She helped fund the new library wing. She attended every concert and sat nearest the stage, face expressionless as musicians fumbled through compositions Ariel herself had once perfected. Some nights she wandered the palace gardens in the dark, trailing fingers across roses she had once planted as a girl. She found the tree under which she'd once sat with Prince Corwin, listening to his hopes of a better world. He was no longer in the palace. After her exile, he had retreated to a coastal monastery and never returned. The official word was that he had found peace. Ariel wondered if he had ever looked for her. Still, this wasn't about Corwin, or even the king. This was about Mareva, the woman who had smiled as the guards dragged her away, the one who had orchestrated her ruin with a whisper and a lie. One night, while the court danced beneath lanterns and flower garlands, Ariel sat in her chamber. A fire crackled in the hearth. Before her sat a harp, not the one of her youth, but a new design she had crafted herself. Its frame was dark ironwood, its strings made of tempered wire. Each note rang sharper than steel. She could still play, not beautifully, not effortlessly, but the music lived in her blood, in her broken hands, in the silence that followed every note. She plucked a melody that night unlike any she had written before, something cold and slow, heavy with memory. It was not a song for others. It was a warning. And somewhere deep within the palace, Countess Mareva woke with a start, convinced she'd heard something in the wind, a note, a name, or perhaps a ghost, or... The midsummer gala was approaching, the most opulent night in the Eldrathi calendar. Nobles from every corner of the realm would gather beneath the star-draped ceilings of the grand hall, dressed in pearls and powdered silks, competing not just in fashion, but in influence. For Ariel, still veiled beneath the persona of Lady Nyra, it was the perfect stage. She had spent months weaving herself into the fabric of the court. She had earned the trust of servants, merchants, and even a few guards. They thought her mysterious but harmless. She let them. In the weeks leading up to the gala, she intensified her visits with Countess Mareva, requesting advice on gowns, on jewels, on matters of etiquette. She gifted her rare teas and foreign perfumes, always delivered without a word, but with a graceful bow. Mareva, never immune to adoration, accepted it all with open arms. She had no idea she was opening her gates to a slow-moving dagger. Meanwhile, Ariel met secretly with Sir Randall Keir in the outer ruins of the city. Cloaked in shadow, they spoke without words. He handed her a thin scroll detailing new names, officials, and guards on Mareva's private payroll. Ariel nodded. She had already begun sending unsigned letters to the palace steward, each containing exact figures and routes of bribes. She made sure each clue was just clear enough to raise suspicion, never quite enough to spark open accusation. By the time the gala night arrived, the whispers around Countess Mareva had taken on a sharper edge. She's not been seen at court meetings. I heard her chamber door is always locked. Something about her steward being arrested. None of it came from Ariel's lips. She didn't need to speak. The grand hall blazed with golden light as noble after noble stepped onto the marble floor, their names called by silver-tongued heralds. Music swelled. Wine flowed. But when Lady Nyra entered cloaked in midnight blue silk, a black rose pinned above her heart, the crowd turned to look. Even Mareva. Their eyes met across the room. Mareva smiled, but it was a fragile thing now, lips taut, eyes searching for reassurance in Lady Nyra's stillness. The evening passed in dances and formalities. But just before midnight, as tradition dictated, a solo performance was scheduled, the Harp of Eldrath, a musical tribute played every year to honor peace and unity. This year, no one had been announced as the performer. The hall fell silent when Lady Nyra stepped onto the stage. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Mareva stiffened, her eyes narrowing. But Ariel, cloaked still in silence, sat before a harp carved of black ironwood, the very one she had forged with her broken hands. She raised her fingers and played. The melody was not grand or triumphant like years past. It was slow, deliberate, aching with loss, each note bent with the weight of sorrow and memory. It was the sound of a heart once shattered and reshaped into something cold and indestructible. The court was entranced, but Mareva was terrified. She stood abruptly halfway through the performance. Her wine spilled across the floor. "I must go," she murmured, brushing past a line of startled nobles. "Now." Ariel saw it. She expected it. She plucked a final note, low, sharp, final, and stood as Mareva disappeared behind a velvet curtain. She followed. In the narrow corridors behind the grand hall, the torchlight flickered. Mareva walked quickly, her heels clicking like a metronome. Her breath hitched when she turned and saw Ariel silent and still, only a few steps behind. "Who are you?" she hissed. "What trick is this?" Ariel said nothing. Mareva backed into a side room, one of the old preparation chambers for performers, long unused. She locked the door behind her. "I know what you are," she snapped. "You're one of them, one of those forest witches. You think you can frighten me with music and shadows? You're nothing." Ariel unfastened the black rose from her gown and placed it on the table between them. Beneath it lay a tiny silver ring, tarnished but unmistakable. The same ring Prince Corwin had once given Ariel the night before she was condemned. Mareva's eyes widened in horror. "You," she breathed. Ariel stepped forward, slowly, deliberately. Her gloved fingers reached for the knife tucked at her thigh, not to kill but to cut. She lifted the blade and pointed it at Mareva's throat. Mareva trembled, but Ariel shook her head. She pressed the dagger to the table, then turned and walked away. Because she understood now, Mareva feared silence more than death. Let her live. Let her wonder every night who else remembered. Let her wait in terror for the next quiet footstep, the next strange letter, the next memory that won't die. Let the silence do what no blade ever could. The aftermath of the gala rippled through Eldrath like a tremor beneath calm waters. Countess Mareva vanished from court within days. She cited illness at first, then spiritual retreat. But whispers told a different story, that she wandered the halls of her estate, sleepless and pale, speaking to shadows and silences, waking from nightmares with her sheets torn and soaked in sweat. Some claimed she had gone mad. Others claimed she was haunted. Ariel still. Lady Nyra said nothing. She returned to the palace gardens, strolled the moonlit corridors, attended council meetings in silence. Her status had grown. Her mystery was now legend. But her revenge was not yet complete. The court believed King Edric to be strong, unshaken, invincible. He still held audiences in the throne hall, still wore his crown of rubies, still issued edicts with the flick of a jeweled hand. But Ariel knew better. She had watched him during the performance, how his gaze had faltered, how his fingers tightened on the armrest as if trying to grip the past into place. He remembered her, not fully, not clearly, but something in that music had scratched the glass of his memory. And now it was time for him to see the crack. Ariel traveled in secret to the catacombs beneath the palace, a network of tunnels older than the city itself. Only a few remembered them, fewer still dared enter. But Sir Randall had shown her the maps, and she had found what she needed, the crypt of the forgotten. It was where the royal family buried those they wished erased, bastard kin, traitorous lords, disgraced heroes, names that were struck from records but not from stone. There, beneath layers of dust and roots, she found the sarcophagus of Lord Halvar Grell, the former Minister of War, executed for treason after opposing the king's alliance with Mareva's faction. He had once been Ariel's patron, the one who commissioned her to play at peace talks, the one who had secretly taught her statecraft through music and metaphor. She knelt before his tomb, and for the first time in years she played. No strings, no harp, just her hands against the stone lid. A rhythm soft and slow like a heartbeat returning. She hummed through her lips, broken as they were a sound that barely escaped her throat. The catacombs listened. The dead, she believed, always listened. When she returned to her chambers, she began the final step. The letters. Handwritten with her careful, practiced hand, each letter bore a different name. Some were addressed to regional lords, others to key allies of the crown. Each letter contained fragments of truth records of Mareva's bribes, of the king's complicity in the banishment of loyal ministers, of whispered plots that shaped wars and peace alike. And at the end of each letter, a single phrase. She remembers what they want forgotten. She signed them not with a name but a single mark, the old musician's symbol for silence, a hollow circle with a horizontal slash through it. Then she sent them. Within a fortnight, the court trembled again. 2 governors publicly questioned the king's decisions. A high priest refused a blessing at the harvest feast. More importantly, a growing number of nobles began visiting Lady Nyra, seeking quiet counsel in hidden corners behind drawn curtains. She gave them nothing but silence, and in that silence they found fear. One morning a servant appeared at her door. "The king has summoned you," he said, trembling. Ariel nodded. She dressed simply, not in midnight silks or veils, but in a gown of soft gray linen, the color of clouds before a storm. Her hair she let fall, naturally streaks of silver beginning to show. At her throat she wore a single pendant, the broken harp string she had kept all these years twisted into the shape of a flame. When she entered the throne hall, every step echoed. King Edric sat alone. The hall was quieter than usual. No musicians, no guards, just stone and memory. He looked older now. The weight of his crown seemed heavier. When his eyes met hers, they flickered with something unspoken, not recognition, not yet, but something near it. "You were not born to nobility," he said. She said nothing. "You do not speak," he continued. "You wear a broken harp string as a pendant, and you play music that makes old men cry." Still, she said nothing. His hand tightened on the throne. "Who are you?" Ariel stepped forward, slowly. She reached into her sleeve and drew out a folded scrap of parchment, faded and torn, stained with blood and time. She handed it to him. He unfolded it. His eyes scanned the contents. It was a song, a melody he had once commissioned for a royal banquet long ago. He had only heard it once, but he had praised it in front of the court. The musician had curtsied. A girl, with golden hair and quiet hands. He remembered. His eyes widened. Ariel turned her message delivered. not of threats, not of violence, but of memory. Let him sit on that throne knowing the past was alive. Let him fear every whisper of a harp, every noble who questioned every shadow in the hall. Let him remember what he tried to bury. Autumn came to Eldrath with a hush in the wind. Leaves fell in slow spirals over the palace grounds, cloaking the marble courtyards in copper and gold. Musicians tuned their lutes with greater care. Servants moved more quietly. Even the bells in this tower rang softer, as if unwilling to disturb the air. The silence had spread. Lady Nyra, or rather the woman who had once been Ariel, stayed in the capital, her name etched into the fabric of the court like a delicate thread no one dared pull. She still wore no title, held no official role, and never once raised her voice. And yet the court listened. They listened because Countess Mareva had disappeared entirely. Some said she had fled across the sea. Others whispered she had taken her own life. One rumor claimed she wandered the old roads dressed in rags, asking strangers if they remembered the name Ariel. The truth was irrelevant. What mattered was that she was gone undone, not by sword or scandal, but by silence. And the King Edric had changed. He no longer sat as tall upon his throne. He spoke less in open court and more in private meetings, always glancing toward shadows, always watching the faces of those who had once been beneath his notice. No accusation had ever been spoken, no name uttered aloud, but every eye in the palace had seen him read the parchment that day. Every noble knew what followed. Fear, when properly played, could be a symphony. One evening, as winter neared, a courier brought an invitation to Lady Nyra's chamber. It was from the monastery on the western cliffs. Prince Corwin was returning briefly to attend the consecration of a new temple. He had requested through carefully worded script that Lady Nyra accompany the royal envoy. Ariel stared at the letter for a long time. Her heart had not yearned in years. Not truly. Revenge had occupied her chest like a cold tenant forbidding warmth. But something in the prince's name cracked that frozen place. Not love, not exactly, but a memory of what it had once meant to be human. She accepted. The journey took 2 days by carriage. The road twisted through frost-bitten forests and over gray rivers. The sea was a constant hush in the background, like breath against glass. When they arrived, the monastery bell rang low and solemn. Corwin stood beneath the archway, no longer young but not yet old, his face lined with gentleness, not regret. He recognized her instantly, not because of her features, though time had shaped them, not because of her silence, but because of her eyes. "Ariel," he said softly, "I thought you were dead." She gave him a slight bow, not courtly but personal, intimate. They walked the cliff paths in silence for a long time, the wind tugging at their cloaks. "I heard rumors," he said eventually. "Whispers of a veiled noblewoman who plays music like a prayer. I hoped, but I didn't let myself believe." She looked at him. He still wore the pendant she had given him, once a miniature harp carved of bone. He had never taken it off. "I'm sorry," he said. "I tried to stop it. I failed." She nodded. It was enough. There was no need to name the betrayal. The scars on her hands were enough reminder. "I left the palace," he said, "because it demanded something from me I could not give the silence of complicity. But you've turned silence into a weapon." She smiled faintly. That night she played for him the same song she had played the night she was condemned, the one the king had silenced. She played it now with all the years folded into each note: sorrow, fury, endurance, grace. When the final chord faded, Corwin's eyes were wet with something deeper than tears. "You've become a legend," he said. She shook her head gently, then reached into her satchel. From it she pulled a small music box carved from the same dark wood as her harp. She handed it to him. He opened it, and a familiar melody began to play, soft, simple, pure. It was the lullaby his mother had sung to them both when they were children. Ariel placed her hand on his, then stood and walked to the edge of the cliff path, staring out at the sea. She did not need a throne. She did not need her voice. She had reclaimed herself not as the girl who had been broken, but as the woman who had reforged her soul in silence and steel. She returned to Eldrath a week later and gave away her fortune piece by piece. To musicians, to orphans, to quiet women who spoke little but saw everything. And then one day Lady Nyra disappeared. No one saw her leave. Some claimed she sailed west where the sun dies behind the sea. Others said she became a ghost haunting the palace halls, appearing only when injustice stirred. But those who truly knew her believed something else, that she had finally laid down her harp and let the silence sing for her.